You know that one number that just kind of lives in the back of your mind and stresses you out more than it should? For a lot of people, that number is $500,000. It sounds huge when you are starting out, then the closer you get to it, the more your brain flips and goes, wait, is that actually enough to cover my life? Or is that just the halfway mark to being broke in retirement? You picture logging into your account at 62 or 67, seeing 500K sitting there. And instead of feeling calm, you feel this weird mix of pride and panic, because now every decision feels permanent. Maybe you have even had that 3 in the morning moment where you are staring at the ceiling doing fake math in your head. You are like, okay, if I spend $2,000 a month, that is $24,000 a year, which over 30 years is $720,000, which is already more than I have. So, I guess I am screwed. Your heart starts racing. You swear you are going to fix everything tomorrow. Then the sun comes up, and life happens, and nothing really changes. That loop is exhausting, and it makes 500K feel like both everything and not nearly enough at the same time. My name is Andy, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, so you do not have to, huh? What I want to show you today is not how to magically turn 500K into 10 million, but how 500K can actually cover your life if you structure it right. Not in a fantasy way, not in a lottery ticket way, but in a boring, predictable, sleep-at-night way. Because the big secret is this: the number in your account matters way less than the system that money sits inside. Structure beats size more than most people realize. Right now, you probably think of 500K like a giant fragile egg. One wrong move, one market crash, one medical bill, and boom, that egg is smashed and there is no reset button. So you do what most people do. You freeze. You underspend because you are scared of running out. Or you overspend because you are tired of being scared, and you will deal with it later. What almost nobody is taught is how to turn that big, fragile egg into a series of smaller, harder-to-break pieces. When you break it into jobs and timeframes, the same 500K suddenly feels a lot more powerful and a lot less fragile. So let's start with the basic math that everybody hears about, but almost nobody actually feels comfortable with: the idea of a safe withdrawal rate. You have probably seen people talk about something like a 4% rule, which is basically this rough idea that if you invest your money in a mix of stocks and bonds, historically, you could take around 4% out in the first year, then increase that number with inflation, and in many scenarios, your money lasted 30 years or more. This is not a guarantee. Markets are messy, but it gives us a starting point. 4% of 500,000 is 20,000 a year. That is around 1,660 a month. Now, if you stack that on top of something like 20,000 a year from Social Security or a small pension, suddenly you are looking at about 40,000 a year, around 3,300 a month, which is an actual livable number in a lot of places. And quick pause here. If this is already making you breathe just a little easier, like, okay, maybe I am not totally doomed, do me a favor. Hit subscribe and tap like. It really helps keep this channel alive and lets me keep doing these long, nerdy breakdowns instead of chasing whatever viral trend is happening this week. All right, now let's take that basic math and turn it into a structure you can actually live with. Because seeing 40,000 a year on paper is one thing. Believing it will actually work for your specific life is something completely different. The first mindset shift is to stop asking, is 500K enough? And start asking, how much of my life does 500K need to cover? Those are very different questions. If you assume that every single dollar you will ever spend for the rest of your life must come directly from that 500K, then yeah, it will always feel too small. But that is not how most real lives work. Most people who feel okay in retirement have layers. They have some guaranteed income like Social Security, maybe a small pension, maybe a part-time job for a few years, and then their savings fill in the gaps. So the question becomes, what is my minimum lifestyle, my floor, and how much of that floor needs to be covered by my investments versus everything else? Let's do a simple example. Say your non-negotiable life costs add up to $2,500 a month. That is your roof, your food, your basic transportation, your insurance, your phone and internet, and a tiny bit of breathing room. That is $30,000 a year. Now imagine your Social Security in retirement is around $20,000 a year. Cool. That means your investments only have to cover $10,000 a year to keep your basic life from falling apart. $10,000 is just 2% of a $500,000 portfolio. Suddenly, you are not leaning all the way out over the edge of that 4% number. You're using 2% to protect the floor of your life, and the rest is flexibility for nicer things and inflation. The second piece is where you live and how you live. $500K in a high-cost big city with a big mortgage and expensive everything is a totally different story than $500K in a paid-off small house in a lower-cost area. I'm not saying you have to move to the cheapest place on earth, but even something like downsizing from a 4-bedroom to a smaller place, or moving one ring out from the city center, or sharing some costs with family can easily free up hundreds of dollars a month. Every $100 a month you cut from your required spending is $1,200 less your portfolio has to generate each year. Over 30 years, that adds up to a huge difference in how hard that $500K needs to work. Now here is where structure really kicks in. Instead of treating $500,000 like one big bucket, you slice it into 3 buckets with different jobs and timelines. Bucket 1 is your safety and stability money. Bucket 2 is your growth money. Bucket 3 is your flexibility and fun money. Same total amount, completely different feeling. When you know which dollars are meant to keep the lights on, which are meant to grow, and which are meant to fund travel, cars, and surprises, you stop treating every purchase like a potential disaster and start acting like a person with a plan. Let's talk about bucket 1, the boring but beautiful one. Imagine putting maybe $150,000 of your $500K into safer stuff. Not zero risk, nothing is zero, but things like high-yield savings, short-term bonds, maybe a conservative allocation that is not going to freak you out when the stock market has a mood swing. The job of this bucket is simple. It fills the gap between your guaranteed income and your basic expenses for the next, say, 7 to 10 years. So if your floor is $30,000 a year and Social Security covers, this bucket only needs to reliably cover that $10,000 gap, $20,000, which at $10,000 a year is 10 to 15 years of breathing room. Knowing your core life is covered for that long changes your entire relationship with the rest of your money. Bucket 2 is your growth engine. This might be around $250,000 invested in a more aggressive mix, tilted more towards stocks because this money does not need to be touched for at least 10 years. The goal here is to outrun inflation and actually grow your future spending power. There will be years where this bucket is up a lot and years where it is down and you feel annoyed. That is fine because you are not relying on it to pay next year's electric bill. You are giving it time to recover. Historically, over long stretches, stock-heavy portfolios have grown significantly more than cash, which means that when you do eventually start tapping this bucket, it can refill bucket 1 and still have some growth left over. Bucket 3 is the one that makes the whole plan feel like an actual life instead of a prison sentence. Maybe this is the remaining $100,000 or so that you use for bigger irregular things. Replacing cars every 10 years, taking the trip you have talked about for decades, helping kids with a wedding, upgrading a kitchen, or shoring up your medical emergency fund. The key is, you do not spend this bucket all at once, and you do not treat it like Monopoly money. You look at that $100,000 and you ask, all right, what are the big moments over the next 20 or 30 years that I want to fund, and how can I spread this out so I'm excited about my future, not terrified of it? When you look at your situation through that 3-bucket lens, something important happens. Market swings become less personal. If stocks drop one year, you are not forced to sell them at a loss to pay next month's rent because bucket 1 is handling that. You can let bucket 2 recover. That alone massively reduces the chance that you will lock in losses at the worst possible time. On top of that, your actual withdrawal rate becomes more flexible. Maybe in good market years, you pull a bit more for fun from your growth and flexibility buckets. In rough years, you tighten up on the discretionary stuff and lean more on the safety bucket, then refill it when markets bounce back. Now let us pull in another underrated piece of this puzzle: income you earn after the traditional retirement age. I am not talking about grinding 40 hours a week forever unless you love your work. I am talking about a small side income for a few years, doing something that is not soul-crushing. Maybe you pick up $10,000 a year consulting, or working 2 days a week, or turning a hobby into something that pays slowly over time. $10,000 a year is not world-changing when you were young, but in retirement, it is huge. $10,000 a year is the same as 2% of a $500K portfolio. So if you create $10,000 a year in income, you can effectively cut your withdrawal rate from 4% down closer to 2% while still living the same lifestyle. Picture a real person with numbers. Let us say her name is Lisa. She is 63 with $500,000 saved, a paid-off modest house, and expects around $22,000 a year from Social Security at full retirement age. She works one more year part-time and saves a little more, but mostly she is just trying not to freak out. With no plan, She might either keep working out of fear until she is exhausted, or she might quit and then spend the first 5 years white-knuckling every bill. With a plan, we could say, all right, $22,000 a year from Social Security, another maybe $8,000 a year from a part-time thing she actually enjoys for the first 5 or 10 years. That is $30,000 already. If her basic lifestyle is around $30,000, her portfolio does not even have to touch the floor of her expenses at the beginning. The $500K can mostly be used to upgrade life and protect against inflation, not to desperately plug holes. Healthcare is always the scary part in these conversations, so let us talk about it. The unknown of medical expenses makes people assume that nothing will ever be enough. One way to handle that inside a $500K structure is to treat a slice of that money as a dedicated health buffer. Maybe you choose to keep $20,000 to $40,000 of your safety bucket specifically earmarked for deductibles, out-of-pocket maximums, and surprise medical stuff. You can pair that with a high-deductible plan, or Medicare plus a supplement when you qualify. Is that perfect protection from every scenario? No. But now, instead of this vague, swirling fear of what if, you have a clear, dedicated pile of money whose only job is to catch those hits. Another underrated move is to smooth out your spending so your portfolio does not get whiplash. A lot of people do this thing where they live super frugally, then splurge hard, then panic and clamp down over and over. Your portfolio hates that because you keep forcing random withdrawals. A calmer way is to decide ahead of time how much you're going to spend each year from your fun bucket. Maybe you say, all right, I am going to give myself an extra $5,000 to $7,000 a year for travel and big purchases. You stash that amount in a separate account at the start of each year, and that is your play money. When it is gone, it is gone. When there is some left, you roll it to next year. That rhythm lets your investments breathe and makes your lifestyle feel more stable. Then there is the psychology part, which honestly is 90% of this. If you spent decades scraping and saving, it feels wrong to start spending the money. Your identity is wrapped in being the person who tucks money away, not the person who lets go. So even when the math says you are okay, you feel guilty every time you buy a plane ticket or a nicer bottle of wine. That is why structure is so important. You are not randomly pulling money out. You are following a plan you already agreed to. When you know, hey, this $1,000 right here came from bucket 3, which is literally my fun and flexibility bucket, not the rent bucket, your brain relaxes. You actually give yourself permission to enjoy what you worked for. One simple trick is to separate your accounts by job, not just by institution. For example, all the income that is meant to cover your floor flows into one checking account that pays your recurring bills. Then, maybe you have a smaller checking account that you use for fun stuff, travel, dining out, gifts, hobbies, whatever. Each month or each quarter, you transfer a specific amount into that fun account based on your plan. When that account is low, you know you are spending at the top of your plan. When it has extra, you know you can either enjoy more or roll it to the future. This is the same idea people use in budgeting while working, but it becomes even more powerful when your paycheck is partly coming from your own investments. You might be thinking, okay, Andy, this all sounds nice, but what if there is another big crash like 2008 or a long, ugly stretch where returns are lower? The honest answer is that no plan is bulletproof, but the combination of 3 buckets, a flexible withdrawal rate, some guaranteed income, and the option to adjust your lifestyle a bit in bad years puts you in a much stronger spot than just winging it. You can reduce withdrawals slightly when markets are down, pause big purchases, pick up a bit of extra income for a season, or consider a small housing adjustment. Each lever you have, even if you only pull it a little, makes that $500K more resilient. The big thing I want you to walk away with is this. $500,000 on its own is just a number that will always feel scary if you stare at it in isolation. $500,000 plus $30,000 or so a year between Social Security and maybe a small side income?